Right, good morning. It is early. I'm usually up this early, but I don't usually have to be a pleasant individual this early. So this is a fun experiment. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to tell you two stories. The first is a little bit about psychology, and the second is a little bit about what I do, software design. And then I'll tell you about how those two come together. So imagine for me, if you will, that you're running. You might be on your morning jog, or you might be preparing for a marathon. You can feel your shoes hit the ground with every step. You feel the air fill your lungs quickly as you breathe heavily. You might be in pain, but you don't really notice it. You are no longer motivated by the destination or whatever goal it is that made you start running. You become motivated by the activity itself. The worries and frustrations of everyday life seem to slip away. It's just all about you and finding your limits. You find yourself to be in the zone. Maybe this has happened at work. Maybe you were working on something that you really enjoy, and you found yourself 10 times happier and 10 times more productive, and time seemed to slip away without you really noticing. This psychologist, who I will not insult by trying to pronounce his name, spent dozens of years studying happiness and productivity. And he came across this phenomenon of being in the zone. And he called it being in a state of flow. What he found was that in order to enter a state of flow, we have to be engaging in some activity that requires a lot of our skills, high skills, but that is also kind of a stretch for us. It has to have high perceived skills and require it has to be a high perceived challenge. So if our skills outpace our challenges, we kind of slip into boredom. Or if our challenges outpace our skills, we slip up into anxiety. But that generally, as long as we're doing something that we're relatively good at, that we're skilled at, but that activity is still a stretch for us, that we enter this state of flow, or being in the zone, the state of optimal experience. And this is that place where we are most happy during our lives. And this is the place that we are most productive. So I started to learn a lot about the psychology of flow and really figuring out how to manipulate it within my own life, and I thought it was really interesting. But then after a couple of months, I started to wonder, does this have an impact on what I do? I design products for people to use. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that second story. Software is the means through which we achieve often monumental accomplishments. Whether we're building a company, writing a book, or anything else, our greatness is achieved with software often as the medium. It may just be text on a screen, but so often it represents the content of our lives, our communication and relationships with others, our work, our attempts at doing what we do better. It is through software that we create and interact with the content of our lives, and that software should enable us to enter a state of flow when we are interacting with that content. The better the software, the more enriched of an experience that we can have with the content of our lives. And this is what attracted me to software design in the first place. As a kid, I was obsessed with this notion that the world is not simply as we take it, but that we can improve it, we can mold it, we can help change it. That the best way is rarely the way it's already done, and that the way it's already done is usually just one solution that somebody no smarter than ourselves came up with. I was around 11 at the time, so anyone that has raised a teen knows that that means I was about 3 years away from knowing everything, right? But that these solutions were come up just by everyday people, and that we could improve upon them. And software is the most inexpensive way to realize this. And I'll give you an example. When I started here at Virginia Tech, as my fellow Hokies know, we have phenomenal dining centers, and there's tons of them. I also loved having a meal plan and feeling like everything was half off. So I always ate on campus. But I found myself often tugging at locked doors late at night when it was snowing into the breaks. I wouldn't know what dining centers are open because they all had seemingly random hours of operations. So I kept telling my friends, I kept telling my now wife that we really just need a website that we can hit, and it'll just show us the dining centers that are open right now, and that's it. And so one day, or 2 days, I spent 2 days and I built exactly that. And we called it Hungry Hokie. Luckily, we didn't hear from university marketing on that. But that project, it took about 2 days to build. It went on to get hit thousands of times a day. It got coverage from the New York Times and the Washington Post, and other students would develop other applications built on the API. The one in the middle in particular, I did not build that. Another student who is currently, I think, a senior, built the Windows Phone application on top of that API. For just a small app with that much impact, but it's because it was a solution that helped us live our lives a little bit more easily. So how do these two things go together? The psychology of flow and software design. As software designers and developers, we have to remember that we're building these things for people to use, just like the car is designed around the human with a comfortable seat and controls that match how our body works. Our software should be equally ergonomic. Or like the pen, which has a gel grip where your hand goes, our software should be designed around the human. If further, our tools should not interrupt our work. If the pen worked the way that most software does today, it would run out of ink or overflow on a daily basis, right? But so we strive to make software like the pen, unobtrusive, understandable, and predictable. The pen capitalizes on what you already know about using writing instruments, but it can improve upon that experience in different ways for different people. And one of the best ways to design around the human is to design around the human's mind. And this takes into account a heavy dose of psychology, but that's why I use the psychology of flow. We should be equally uninterrupted by our software as we are our pens, but further, our software should actively decrease the cognitive burden placed on us and promote the conditions that lead to optimal experience so that we can enter a state of flow when we are doing what we try to do within the meaningful context of our lives. So what we do is we use the conditions needed to enter a state of flow to direct our user interface design. Now the first major, and I'll give you a couple examples of how we do exactly that, not to sell you on our product, but to sell you on our process, which can be easily replicated in any organization, product, or service. If you remember, I said to enter a state of flow, you need to have a challenge. I think it's important to note that it should not be challenging to use the software itself. We all know what that's like, and that definitely doesn't lead to a state of flow. It should be challenging to write a book, but it should not be challenging to use text editing software. The software should capitalize on the skills we already have to become invisible, like the pen. In order to enter a state of flow, our software needs to decrease the cognitive burden placed on us. We did this originally with MailPilot when we pushed it out for the first time. If you imagine for me a spectrum where the people and how we think about email is all the way on the left, and the protocols that lie underneath email are all the way on the right. Most email clients generally sit here. They expose the basic functionality from the protocols into the interface. And for my fellow software engineers, I know I'm really simplifying this a bit, but I look forward to your emails alerting me to that fact anyway. But with MailPilot, we really wanted to bring this the interface closer to the user. And what this means is there's got to be a lot of glue code in between the interface and how email actually works, but we get to shrink that cognitive or semantic gap between how we're thinking about email and how the interface looks and works. In order to enter a state of flow, we have to require as few interactions as possible. This is because if something requires a lot of interactions, tasks become mundane and redundant. And instead of tackling the challenges of our work head on, we feel like we're just doing simple data entry. So we have to infer as much as we can from as few interactions as possible. In MailPilot, there's a feature called reminders. If you get a bill that's due on Friday, you can set it to remind you on Friday. It leaves your inbox reducing clutter, and on Friday, it pops back up to the top to notify you. Setting a reminder in any other application, like a calendar or a task list, might take 5 clicks, to pop up the date picker, choose the month, choose the day, click OK. In MailPilot, we wanted to figure out how do we get that number of interactions down as low as possible. And don't worry, I'm not going to say we hit 0, because that would be very creepy. But we did hit 1. So in MailPilot, when you take a message, you can just slide it from the left to the right to increase the number of days that you will remind in. Releasing it would then set it. Here, it's just looping, which is why it's not going to release. And so it only requires a single interaction to do that. In order to enter a state of flow, we need to know what to do and how to do it. This is very apparent when you take into account the fact that procrastination, when not caused out of a fear of failure, is often caused out of not knowing how to begin. That's why we recommend to clinical procrastinators just to start, to do the first hour of the work. We have to know what to do and how to do it. In software, we promote this with a predictable, self-documenting interface. I'll give you 2 examples of how we do this in MailPilot. All of the buttons that you can use to organize a message have their keyboard shortcut exposed right on them. And what we found, this became a fan favorite feature. Even though it's no functionality, no added functionality. We just put the label on the button, right? But this put keyboard shortcuts in the reach of everyone, not just in the hands of power users. Another way we do this is instead of reply and reply all, the buttons say reply to Mike or reply to Michelle and reply to everyone. Anyone here that's been stuck on a reply all chain that seems to go on for eternity totally understands why this is needed. In order to enter a state of flow, we need to have clear and reachable goals. We need to understand what the goal is, and we need to feel like we have some capacity to reach it. If I don't feel like I can reach a goal, I'm not going to engage in the activity in the first place. This is the obvious counterexample to that. When you see your email application icon with 13,000 unread emails, you are not going to engage in trying to clean up your inbox. There's no way you're going to get that done. And so in MailPilot, what we do is we group the messages by day, and we only show you the number of messages in that section. It's a much more attainable goal. In order to enter a state of flow, we must have freedom from distractions and freedom from interruptions. Interruptions will break us out of a state of flow, and so we have to reduce clutter. Here is a screenshot of the inbox, of my inbox in MailPilot, and as you can see, most of these messages are completely irrelevant. I don't care about that email from Zazzle or from Walmart. I really only care about the one 4 down where I'm having a conversation with a couple of folks about authentication. So in MailPilot, there's this relatively unknown button in the checkbox in the settings window where when you check it, what MailPilot does is it automatically determines what messages were sent by a computer versus which ones were sent by a human person opening a compose window and typing text. And what it's going to do is then collapse those sent by a computer, reducing clutter, letting us really get to the meaningful content of our lives more quickly. In order to enter a state of flow, we also must receive immediate feedback. If anyone here has recently tried to print 50 copies of anything, you definitely understand why this one's important. You would love to know if the printer knows that you've sent it something, especially if it's on a network. Waiting is really the death of software. And so in MailPilot, on the modals where you send a message to a different folder or organize it further, the buttons don't just say go or move or OK. The text on the buttons change as you change what you're going to do. So if I'm going to remind a message tomorrow, it says remind tomorrow. If I change that date to the next day, it then says remind in 2 days, or it'll say remind in a week. If I start typing a list that exists, it'll say move to list. But if I start typing a new list that doesn't yet exist, the text on the button will change to say create new list and move. And so it gives me feedback even before I take that action. The conditions of flow can be applied to any product, organization, or service. How do you inhibit or incubate optimal experience for your customers? And do you help or burden your customers to or from entering a state of flow? Thank you so much for your time. My name is Alexander Obenauer. This is my email address. If you want to chat more about this, please let me know. I love sitting down for coffee and chatting about this kind of thing. And I particularly need to thank my incredible wife and my co-founder Josh for helping me put together this presentation and the RBTC for having me. So thank you all very much.